Okay, so this is going to be a lecture series on out Fn. This is one of my favorite groups. Fn here is the free group of rank n. Okay, Fn is a free group, rank n. So that means that it has a basis of size n. So for example, Fn is a1 to a(n), like this. And then what is this out? Well, you take the group of all automorphisms of this group. Okay, so this is a group of all automorphisms, and then you mod out by the normal subgroup that consists of inner automorphisms, right? Okay. So why study this group? Well, there are several possible answers here. One is that the free group itself is one of the fundamental objects in mathematics because it's free. It shows up everywhere. And then you can view this as being the symmetry group of the free group. Okay, and here's maybe a more humorous reason why you should study this group. But by the way, you should feel free to ask questions, and if you don't ask questions, I'll ask you questions. Okay, so to break the ice, the first question is coming up. So let's say we agree that the simplest interesting topological space is a circle, and we'll hear more about the circle later in the week. Okay, so but the question for you is, what is the so suppose now you understand everything about the circle, everything there is to know about the circle you know, and now you're ready to move on to the second simplest interesting topological space. So what should that be? Any ideas? What?
Figure 8.
Figure 8. Okay, so you mean like a graph. This is what you mean. Is that what you mean? Yeah, it's like a wedge of two circles. Or maybe we shouldn't stay. Maybe we shouldn't stay with just two circles. It could just stay like a graph, right? That seems like a good idea. What else? A sphere. That's a good answer. Although it doesn't fit in my scheme here because it's simply connected. I also want the fundamental group to be interesting.
Torus.
Torus. Okay. Or more generally, or what? Let's just say n torus. Okay, just to make it harder. Okay, so let's say okay, the n torus. So this is just so you could think of this as being roughly or at least it's homotopy equivalent to a wedge of circles, and this is a product of circles. And then what else? Any other? I'm just looking for one more generalization of a circle or one manifold. A circle is a one manifold. That's a hint. So there's what comes after one manifold? The two manifold, right? The surface, right? Something like a surface. And then you can ask about what the symmetry groups of these objects are. Okay, so what's the symmetry group of the n torus? What are the natural homeomorphisms of the torus? Okay, so that's a harder question, but it's something like GLNZ. So these are linear transformations of Rn that preserve the integers inside. And any such transformation is going to descend to the torus. Torus is, this is Rn mod Zn. So if you give me a linear automorphism of Rn that preserves Zn, that's going to induce a homeomorphism of the torus. So this group is somehow a symmetry group of the torus in some sense. And the symmetry group of a surface is called a mapping class group. So so this is, I don't know, maybe denoted like this. This is the modular group of the surface sigma. And the point is that these groups are very well studied in geometric group theory and more generally mathematics. And the symmetry group of a graph is somehow out of Fn. And these three families of groups are related. They're analogous to each other, and maybe this one is not as well understood as the other two. Somehow historically these two have been much better studied, and so somehow the research direction that underlies the lectures here is to understand this group better along the lines of these two groups. Okay, maybe just a little bit of history before I start with some definitions. So I think the starting point for the study about Fn was a theorem of Nielson. Maybe that's where you can say that the study started. So Nielson in 1924 proved that out Fn is finitely presented. He found a presentation. It's finitely presented. And then there were more developments later. I'll just write down a few more significant ones. So Magnus in 1935, he was studying this what's called the Torelli subgroup. It's a certain subgroup of out Fn. There's a natural homomorphism from out Fn to GLNZ, and he studied the kernel of this, and he proved the theorem that kernel is finitely generated. We won't get into that, so maybe I won't say any more. And then Whitehead related out Fn to the study of three manifolds in 1936. So this was all a very long time ago. But then a big event, well, maybe I should also mention the Stallings. Although this is not, strictly speaking, something that happened in out Fn, but it's a big tool for the study of out Fn. And we'll talk about this. That's the topic today. So Stallings in, when was this, 1983, he introduced something called folding. And this is what I'll talk about today. But the big event in the history was this is sometimes described as the Big Bang. So Kohler and Voigtman in 1986 defined what's called outer space. Okay, so 1986, so they defined outer space. So what is outer space? So when you study a group, then maybe the first thing you ask is whether there is some nice contractible space where this group acts properly. Okay? So for example, for GLNZ, or more generally for arithmetic groups, there is a symmetric space where these groups act properly. It's a nice, very nice contractible space with a very nice geometry. For example, when n is equal to 2, you may have seen this example. Well, let's say instead of a G, it's SL. It's like SL2Z is going to act on the hyperbolic plane by isometries. And so the appropriate space that one wants to study related to out Fn is outer space. Okay. So that's going to be the topic tomorrow. I'll define it, and we'll talk about some basic properties. Okay, and then there were some developments later. So there are these things called train tracks. I'll talk about train tracks also. That's probably going to come on Monday, next Monday. They're important for study of individual automorphisms. And then more recently, there was a metric introduced in outer space called the Lipschitz metric, and I'll talk about that too. Lipschitz metric. This is I don't know, less than 10 years old. Okay, so they'll probably come in on day 3. So this is my rough outline. We'll discuss folding first, and then outer space, and then the Lipschitz metric, and then we'll do train track. So we won't do exactly the way that these things came about in history. We'll switch the order of these two. Okay. All right. So are there any questions, or should I start with definitions, and then I'll ask more questions? Okay. Okay. So we need to agree on what the graph is. So for me, a graph is just a cell complex of dimension at most 1. Okay, so you have some vertices, and then you attach some edges, and that's it. So that's a graph for us. Okay, so that's a graph. So this is a cell complex of dimension less than or equal to 1. So for example, so you can have a bunch of vertices and then you just attach edges. And they could be loops, you can have parallel edges, you know, whatever you want. Okay, so here's a graph. Now, it's going to be important to know how to identify the fundamental group of a graph with a free group. So everybody knows that the fundamental group of a graph is free. And how does one find a particular identification? So recall, so to identify, so let's say we have a base point. One of the vertices is a base point. So to identify the fundamental group of this graph, let's call it gamma, with respect to this base point V0 with a free group, we need to choose, right? What do we choose? So the first thing is, what do we choose first? A maximal tree, right? We choose a maximal tree. Okay, so one maximal tree. Okay, so let's make some choices here. Okay, so let's say this one, and that's it, right? If I add anything else, I don't have a tree anymore. Okay. What else do we need to choose? What do we do with the edges that are not in the maximal tree? We need to orient them and label them, right? So, so let's say here's, okay, so and then we label them A, B, C, D like this. So orient and label all edges outside T. And then what? And then you're ready to write down an isomorphism. So then pi1 of gamma with respect to V0, there's an isomorphism to the free group generated by these labels, A, B, C, D. Right, there's an isomorphism now. And how does this isomorphism work? Well, every element of pi1 is represented by a simplicial loop, by a loop that just follows edges around. Right, so this isomorphism is just read off the labels. Right? If I start with some loop, it starts at V0. Here's V0. The loop goes over some red edge. Maybe I should give you an explicit example. Let's see. There I have. This is where I would need the fourth color. 3 colors don't suffice. 4 suffice. Okay. So let's say. Oh, I didn't. Yes, you should have stopped. No, that's right. I didn't label the edge at the top. So this is E. See, you should have picked up on this. I did it on purpose to test you. Okay. Did I get them all now? Okay. So what is the? Let's say I take this loop here. I go across these 2 red edges and I come back over the edge labeled E, but in the opposite direction. What is that loop? What is that element of pi1?
E inverse.
E inverse, of course. So. Yeah, whatever it is, you just follow. You just ignore what happens when you cross red, but when you cross one of the labeled edges, you read off the label. And you put the inverse if you're crossing in the opposite direction, right? Okay. Okay, so that was just a little review. And now we need a few definitions before we can state Stallings' theorem. Okay, so morphism. So we have graphs. Now we need functions between graphs. Those are called morphisms. And what is a morphism? Well, it's a continuous map that sends vertices to vertices and edges to edges. Okay, so definition, a morphism, say f from gamma to gamma prime between two graphs is a map. Maps are always continuous. Map that sends vertices to vertices and edges to edges. Now it's edges to edges rather than edges to edge paths. Sometimes people allow maps that send edges to edge paths, not just a single edge, but some path that goes across several edges. We don't allow that here. For morphism, edges have to go to single edges. So edges, maybe I'll take a pen, cannot collapse, for example. You're not allowed to collapse an edge. It's not allowed to go to a point. It has to go to an edge. And cannot map to edge paths. Well, edge paths longer than one edge. Okay? So for example, here is okay, let's say we have this graph and then I'll have so maybe I'll just label them to, so this A goes to A, both of these will go to, so B and B prime, both of these will go to B. So I'm going to identify B and B prime to a single edge called B over here, and then I'll have C and D like this. And to really specify the map, I would have to assign orientations probably here, like C and D, C and D. And now that specifies that C goes, this way, not the other way. Okay. Okay, so yes, question?
So here, the adjacent vertex and edge should be sent to adjacent vertex and edge, right?
Yes, right. That's what continuity guarantees, right? If a vertex is one of the endpoints of the edge, then it has to map to the vertex that's the endpoint of the image edge. Okay. Now, a special kind of morphism is an immersion. So that's the definition. So a morphism f from gamma to gamma prime is an immersion if it is locally injective. So locally injective, that just means that every point has a neighborhood where this map is injective. And this is automatic if that point is in the middle of an edge, just because we are sending edges to edges. So a little neighborhood of such a point will map homeomorphically to a little neighborhood of the image point. Open edges go homeomorphically to open edges. So the only issue is the vertices. This map is not locally injective. This map has this point here that doesn't have a neighborhood where the function is injective. right? Because these two little pieces of edges will get identified. Okay, so this is not locally injective. It's not an immersion. So what are some examples of immersions? Can you give me some examples?
Just an injective map. Just an injective.
Identity?
Injective morphism.
Injective morphism, sure. If it's injective, then it's really local injective, yes. So injective. What else? Covering maps. So injective maps, covering maps. Now notice that if you have two immersions that can be composed, then the composition is also an immersion. So compositions. Now it actually turns out, well, we always work with finite graphs here. Okay, so it turns out that every immersion, in fact, is a composition of an injection and then a covering map. That's maybe somewhat surprising, but we will be able to prove this. I don't know if I'll actually do it. I'll most likely leave it as an exercise. Okay, so every immersion is going to be a composition of one. So if I give you an immersion, so this is the fact. So if this is an immersion, then you can find that there exists a factorization like this. So this exists and this exists, where this first map is injective, and the second map is a covering map. Okay, so that's a fact. You can try to think about this, but without, what I'm about to say, this is probably kind of hard. Okay, another exercise is that immersions are injective in pi1. In other words, if I take the homomorphism induced by homomorphism in fundamental groups induced by an immersion, that's always injective. Okay. Does anybody have any idea how to do this? I mean, I guess this would imply it. You know that covering maps are injective in pi1 and also inclusions of graphs. But how would you just prove it from first principles without knowing this fact? So if I take some non-trivial loop in the graph, so what does that mean? I can represent it by an edge path in the graph that's not trivial. If the loop is non-trivial, then the path is not trivial. It is a loop in this graph that starts at v0 and goes around and then comes back to v0. That loop itself is a locally injective map, except maybe at v0. So when I map it to gamma prime, it will stay. If the map is an immersion, this will stay a locally injective path, except maybe at the base point. And therefore, it will be a non-trivial element of pi1. So non-trivial elements of pi1 are represented by these immersed loops, except at the base point. The immersion might fail to be. The loop might fail to be locally injective at the base point, right? You could have something like, here's your base point, and then you go like this. So this is like, I don't know, A, and this is B. So you can have something like A, B, A inverse, right? That's a non-trivial element if this is your base point, but it's not injective. It's not locally injective at B0. You really view it as a path. If you view it as a map of a path, then that's an immersion. and immersions are going to send paths like this to paths like this. They'll be immersed paths. And therefore, they'll be non-trivial. So this is how you could prove this. Do this exercise. Immersions are injective in pi1. Okay. Okay, and then we need one more definition, and that's what a fold is. Okay, so what is a fold? So it's also kind of a morphism. Okay, so fold is a morphism I don't know, should go to F from gamma to, so this is going to be a certain quotient graph of gamma. Okay, so the target is always a quotient graph of gamma obtained as follows. Okay, so you start with two edges in gamma that are oriented and have a common initial point. So, so let E1 and E2 be two, and for now, for this definition, I want them to be oriented. So that I can talk about the initial point. Two oriented edges with the same initial point, initial vertex. Then let gamma, so maybe we can call this gamma prime. It's a certain quotient of gamma. So gamma prime, this is going to be gamma where you identify E1 with E2. And F is and F from gamma to gamma prime is the quotient map. Okay, so that's a fold. So I'm going to draw some pictures. There are really four types of folds. Okay, so there is type 1. You can have two edges that only share the initial point and nothing else, and they're both, they're not loops, they're embedded edges like this. So there are other edges attached here, but they don't really matter very much. And so I identify E1 and E2, and I get a single edge, and then all these other edges are just where they were before. Okay, so this is my fold F. So there's the rest of the graph that doesn't change. I'm just identifying E1 and E2. Okay, and then type 2. This is similar, but one of the edges is a loop. Okay, so maybe this is E1, and this is E2, and then there are some other edges around. And now I'm going to identify E1 and E2, so that means you're wrapping this edge around E1, and so you get something like, you just end up with a single loop, and now there are 4 bits coming out, right? A total of 4 bits. Okay, what's type 3? Well, there are 2 more. Right? So you can have 2 edges that share both endpoints. You can see that these are a little bit different, right? And so I just identify. And then type 4 is when they're both loops. Okay. And there are more edges here. Like that. Okay, so that's it. Is that clear? Okay, so that's the main definition for today. So certainly make sure you understand the definition. Okay, so now we can. Oh, there's another exercise, and you should tell me how to do it. Okay. Okay, so exercise. So in pi 1, type 1 and 2 are isomorphisms. And type 3 and 4 are epimorphisms. But they're not injective. You can see that you're killing a loop, right? There's a loop that's non-trivial here, but it dies over here. So how would you prove something like this? For example, how would you prove that in type 1 you have an isomorphism in pi 1? What would be the simplest argument? It's a homotopy equivalence, but how do you know it's a homotopy equivalence? Would you construct the inverse? I mean, yeah, that's possible. That's possible. There's something fairly easy from what we discussed. You know, how to identify the fundamental group with the free group. You have to choose a maximal tree, but maybe there is a particularly good maximal tree you can choose in this first case.
E1, E2.
Yeah, you make sure that E1 and E2 are both in the maximal tree. I mean, there are many choices, right? But any subtree can be extended to a maximal tree. So I start with E1 and E2, and then I complete to a maximal tree in any old way, however you want to do it. And then I take the image of this. So over here I'll have a single edge, and that'll be part of my maximal tree. And then whatever else, take the image, and that's going to be a maximal tree. And now you can see that reading off labels here and reading off labels here, it gives you the same answer if you label the same way as well. Okay, so that's maybe the easiest way to see that that's an isomorphism. But you can also, I mean, you'd have to work a little bit harder, but you could construct the homotopy inverse. That would certainly work. In type 2, that doesn't quite work because you cannot put E1 into a maximal tree. But there's a trick. You can subdivide. If you put the midpoint here and the midpoint here, then all of a sudden this fold becomes a composition of two folds, where you fold half of this edge with half of that edge, and then you do it again. So this somehow becomes a composition of two type 1 folds. And so it's an isomorphism in pi 1. And similarly here, you have to find a maximal tree and see that here it's going to be onto, but not 1-to-1. Okay. Now we can state the theorem of Stallings. Okay, so that's it's really, I mean, it's not hard to prove this. It's in a way almost obvious, but there's well, not all, but many classical results can be recovered in a very simple way from this point of view. That's somehow the significance of this. So this is 1983. So every morphism, say gamma to gamma prime, between finite graphs can be factored as, so this gamma is maybe gamma 0, and then I go to gamma 1, I go to gamma 2, and so on, and after a while I get to gamma k, and from gamma k I go to gamma prime. Okay, that's a factorization, okay, where the last map from gamma k to gamma prime is an immersion, and all the others are folds. Okay? How would you prove such a thing? Well, maybe we'll do an example, and then this is really proof by example if you want. But the proof is kind of obvious. Right? If the map might already be an immersion, in which case you can stop. If it's not, that means you can find a place to fold. You can find two edges like this, and then you can so you can factor your original map into a fold and then something else. And then the something else could be an immersion, in which case you can continue folding. And after a while, you'll have to get an immersion because you have fewer and fewer edges. Okay, that's the proof. But let's do an example, and let's see what we can read off from the example. Okay, so example. I want to take the following subgroup of the free group. So my free group, okay, example. my free group is going to be AB, and I'll take the following subgroup called H. It will be generated by 3 elements: A cube B, A inverse. So I'll put a bar over a letter to mean inverse. B AB and A squared B A bar. Okay, and okay, so data like this will define a morphism of graphs. How does that work? Well, I give myself a base point and then 3 loops, one for each of the elements of the free group that are given that generate H. So I want to do it in a particular order so that it's easier to fold. Okay, so it's a, let's see, so this is going to be A, B, right? So this is my first element, A cube B. I'm just writing it like this. Okay, then I'll have a loop over here. So this is going to be, let's see, A inverse. So B, A, B. Okay, like that. And then the last one is A, B, and then this is again A. Okay, that's so this is A squared B A inverse. This is A cube B, and this is A inverse B A B. Okay, so this kind of labeling like this defines a morphism to just and I'm going to put the whole factorization here. So right, so the labeling here defines a morphism to this graph. Right, you send all these vertices to the only vertex you have in the rows. In this graph is called the rows, the wedge of circles, and then all the other edges go the way they're labeled, right? And this map is the image in pi 1 of this morphism is going to be exactly this group H by definition. Okay, but now let's do this factorization like Stallings. Okay, so I want to fold as much as I can until I get an inversion. Okay, so I set up the picture so that it's easy to see what to fold. And in fact, I will make it more economic by folding I'll do more than one fold at the same time. Okay, so for example here, I can identify, so there are 2 A's here, right? So I can fold here. I can fold this A over this A. And I can do the same thing with the B's and then also with these A's. Right? That's going to be my first fold, which is really 3 folds. But they're kind of disjoint from each other, so it's easy to see what's happening. Okay, so this is 3 folds. And what you get is there's a vertex in the middle, and then well, you get kind of a, is this a Mercedes? It's a Mercedes picture. Like that. And there are vertices like this. And then if I did my homework correctly, then the labeling is like this. This is A, this is B, this is also A. There's a B here, A, this is A, the B. Okay, you should make sure I'm doing this right. Yes?
Maybe the label of H from the first diagram, right below leaf, the A and B, the direction of the A and B is maybe opposite.
Well, did you mean like A squared B inverse A instead of A squared B A inverse? Oh, yeah. Did I mean that? A squared, oh yes, I did mean A squared B inverse A, yes. Thank you. A squared B inverse A. I have it correct here, but not I didn't copy it correct. Okay, yes, thank you. Okay, and the base point is still here. Okay, now what can we do? Well, there's more folding, right? We can fold here. Yeah, these two A's can be folded, and these two A's can be folded, and then these B's can be folded. This is also disjoint, but maybe now it's not so easy to see what the ultimate graph is. And this is because, well, so if you do two of them, two of them are going to look like just like this, but the last one will look like this. Okay, I'll still do all three at the same time, just because I want to save some time. But okay, so what you should be thinking about is you should draw the base point kind of at the bottom, right? And then you think of this the circle, the outside circle is going to the top. and so after folding, so this is also threefold. This is going to be type 1 and two type 1s and then type 3. And the graph you'll get is like this. It's a theta graph. So now the rank goes down, right? When you do a type 3, the rank of the fundamental group goes down by 1. And so it'll go down to 2. Okay, so it's this is the base point, and then I have there's A, B, A, and B. Okay, so you can see that, I mean, the labels that come out of the base point, they didn't change. There's an outgoing A, incoming A, and incoming B. That's at the bottom. And then these three edges are just the ones we folded. There's an A and a B and another A. But now it's an immersion. You know, we get these factorizations, but now it's an immersion. There's nothing else left to fold. Right? This last map is an immersion. So there are 6 folds here altogether. 5 of them are type 1, and then there's a type 3. Okay. Now the question is, what does this tell us? Okay. So what are some facts that we can deduce from this? Okay. So let's go over here. Like if somebody hands you a subgroup of the free group defined by like this, right? It's generated by these elements. What are the questions that you'd like to know about the subgroup? You know that the subgroup of a free group is free. So for instance, you might want to ask for a basis for the subgroup, a free basis. You might want to ask if some element belongs to it. If I write down some other element in the A's and B's, you know, does it belong to the subgroup or not? So I claim you can answer questions like this just by looking at this picture. Okay, so why is that? Okay, so let's call the last map here. What should we call it? G. Okay, so what are some facts that so discussion of the example? Okay, so first the image of F sharp. This is the map from pi 1 of, well, I don't have names here, but okay, let's say this is gamma, this is gamma prime, and then this is gamma double prime, just because my Greek letters are not all that great, so everything is a gamma. The delta. Okay. So the image of F sharp from pi 1 of gamma, and maybe I'll suppress the base point, pi 1 of gamma prime is H. So this is by definition. But I claim that this is the same. So claim the image of G sharp is also equal to H. Okay, so why is that? It did not change the image when we folded. Yeah, we did the fold, but the image did not change. Why is that?
Because every time one is force or
Yeah, so they're all epimorphisms in pi 1, right? Folds are, so the reason here is that folds are epi. Folds are epi in pi 1. Exactly. Okay? But the last one is an immersion, so it's injective. So this G sharp is injective, so we see that the rank is 2. Right? So we read off. So G sharp is injective. So rank of H is 2. And not only that, but we can read off a basis. Well, how would we come up with a basis here? Well, again, we need a maximal 3. Yeah, so we need a maximal 3, so there are several choices. I don't know. Well, I mean, okay, let's not make it too complicated. I mean, you know, it's like this loop and then this loop or something, right? So it would be, so it's A squared B inverse A, which is one of the elements given to us. And also, do we see another one here? A inverse B AB, yeah. So these two loops were actually given to us. Right? This one and this one, they form a basis. So basis, I mean there are many bases, but that's an example. So A inverse BA, what is it? A inverse BAB and A squared B inverse A. Right? So we just read that off from the picture. Okay, so let me give you an element like. So does A squared belong to H? Okay, this is just some element. I can write any element, but no, let's just say A squared. Does A squared belong to H or not? No, why not? What should be the procedure here? So I start at the base point, and then I want to realize A squared in the graph. Well, I can do that, but I get to here. It's not a loop. Here's AA, and then I stop. If I had a loop that represented A squared in gamma double prime, right? That loop would be unique because the map is, it's an injective, it's an immersion, so it's that loop that represents A squared would be unique, and therefore it wouldn't read off A squared. It would read off something else. What reads off A squared is not a loop; it's a path. Or what about AB? Maybe that's even more to the point. So no. AB. Does AB belong to the group H? So now I start reading off A, and then I'm sort of stuck. I don't know what to do. There's no B. So the answer is no, for the same reason. In fact, what you can do is construct. You can complete this to the covering space corresponding to H, right? So H is some subgroup of the fundamental group. So there's going to be a covering space corresponding to the subgroup. And how do you construct it from this graph? Well, you just complete it by adding trees, right? You have to complete it to a covering space. So here, for example, there is an edge missing. It should have every vertex should have valence 4. Well, here you only see 3. So there should be a B coming out like this. And then from here on, it's like constructing the universal cover, right? You'll have at every vertex you'll have two B's and two A's, one incoming, one outgoing. Here you'll need 2 edges, right? There's going to be an A and a B, and so on, right? So you have 2 here, 1 here. So you can complete. So you can complete to a covering space corresponding to H by adding trees, by adding labeled trees. Okay, does everybody get that? So in fact, this argument also shows that the immersion you get at the end is also unique. You know, you had some choices of how you fold here. You can choose the order of folds and so on. But the immersion that you get at the end does not depend on the choice of these folds, because it represents the kind of the core of the covering space corresponding to the subgroup H. You can reverse engineer it without saying folds by saying take the covering space corresponding to the subgroup H and then remove all these hanging trees, and that's the graph that immerses to gamma prime and represents this subgroup H. Okay, what else? There's some homework that's going to be handed out at some point, and there are more exercises along these lines. But you can think about, for instance, finding. You can try to find, say, the normalizer of H. That can also be read off from this picture, and various other things. Okay, but so what I want to do now is prove some theorems. Maybe we can do the first before the break, and then we can do some more after the break. But maybe I should pause and ask if there are questions. Everything clear so far? Yes.
Why does the constructions give a covering map of the right-hand side?
Why is it a covering map? So, so if I have a label graph like this, which so I certainly have an immersion, because at every vertex I see all different labels. There is no place to fold, and at every vertex has valence 4. So it's a local homeomorphism. So whenever you have a morphism which is a local homeomorphism, then it's a covering map. So like if I take, let's say I take so what am I supposed to do to prove that it's a covering map? Well, given every point, I have to find a neighborhood so that the pre-image consists of disjoint copies of that, right? Well, so the trickiest, the most interesting point is the vertex itself. So I just take like here's my neighborhood, something like that. And what is the pre-image of this? Well, around every vertex, I just see I see 4 little things, pieces of edges like this, and they map homeomorphically because these labels are all distinct. They all go in 4 different directions. Okay, so that's the covering space corresponding to the subgroup H. It's a covering space, and the image in pi1 is exactly H. And there's only one such covering space. So you always get the same one. No matter how you fold, you always arrive at the same picture. This is like, I mean, if you want analogy, it's like when you start learning linear algebra and you do row operations and you do some manipulations, but at the end you always get the same answer, right? This is kind of, folding is kind of analogous to row reduction. Okay, so let's prove so this is also, yes?
Can you explain why AB is not contained in H?
Because, okay, so maybe in terms of the covering space picture, this will be clearer. So I want to think about this covering space. So I have AB, this is some loop in here, and I want to lift it to this covering space. So I can do that, right? So here, what is the lift? Well, I start at the base point, I do A, and then I do B. And B is one of these edges added here. So this AB goes over here. In other words, it's not a loop. And if you start with a loop that represents an element in pi1 that's in the image of your map in pi1 of the covering map, then it will lift to a loop. Right? That's exactly the criterion. I start with a loop downstairs. When does it lift to a loop upstairs? Well, if and only if this loop is in the image of in pi 1. Okay, so this one, since we lifted it, we see it. It's not a loop. That means that element was not in the image in pi 1, which is H. So AB is not in H. Okay? All right. Well, I do want to prove this theorem, but the proof is very short, and it's all on the board anyway. This is called Marshall-Hall theorem. Okay, so this is now we're doing applications of folding, and maybe this discussion about H can also be viewed as an application of folding. But here's so the first one is Marshall-Hall's theorem. This was proved also, in prehistory. But they did not have, they did not think about graphs for some reason. Even though, I mean, Nielson and these people certainly knew a lot of topology and all this, but somehow it was forgotten over time, and algebraists took over. And it's like, what they did was, it's like thinking about graphs, but all graphs are roses. You're not allowed to use any other graphs but roses. So all groups always had to come with a basis. All three groups had to come with a basis. So that's kind of like always working with roses. And so these theorems were mildly non-trivial, but somehow from this point of view, it's zero triviality. So, okay, so what's the theorem? Actually, what I'm looking at is some other statements. Okay, so let's see. What's Marshall-Hall's theorem? Okay, so given so if H is a subgroup of Fn is finitely generated, then there exists a finite index subgroup H prime in Fn, such that H is contained in H prime, and H is a free factor in H prime. Okay? So, this is now a question of what are the subgroups of free groups, finitely generated subgroups of a free group. And everybody can think of two kinds, right? There are free factors. What's a free factor? Well, we have a basis, and you just take some subset of the basis and look at the subgroup generated by that subset. Like, the subgroup generated by A would be a free factor in this group generated by A and B. Or if I had A, B, and C, then I could take a subgroup generated by A and B. Whenever you have a basis, you take a subset of a basis, that's a free factor. Or equivalently, you can write Fn. You can write Fn as a free product, right? You write it as a free product, then A or B they're both called free factors. Okay, and then there's also a notion of, there's finite index subgroups. For example, you can take a homomorphism from a free group to a finite group and then look at the kernel, and that's a finite index subgroup. And the question is, are there any others? Well, yes, but they're not all that much more complicated. You can always, get any finitely generated subgroup can be obtained by first passing to a finite index subgroup and then taking a free factor of that. And that's it. There aren't any other subgroups, at least finitely generated. Okay, so what's the proof of this? I'm just going to do it for this H that we have on the board. But the proof is the same in general. Okay, so how do I do it? Well, maybe I'll say the proof in one sentence, and then we'll do it in that example. The proof is, what is the proof? Does anybody know? How do you represent a finite index subgroup in terms of graphs?
Finite index common space.
Finite index, that's finite sheeted covering space. So like this G could be a covering space. If G is a covering space, then this thing is a finite index. Yeah, this group would be finite index. Okay, so the proof is just complete the immersion G to a covering space. Covering space by adding edges. Okay, so maybe I'll redraw the picture here. So this is my original picture here. Here we completed it to a covering space not by just adding edges, but we also added a lot of vertices. Now I don't want to add any more vertices, just edges. Okay, but it's the same. So same picture here. There is A. It's A like this. It's a B. Down A, up A, and B down. Okay, so how do I complete this to a covering space, which is going to be a finite sheeted covering space? Well, here I'm missing a B, so I'm just going to draw it out, and then I'll have to sort of pair them off and close up. But for now, I'm just recording that I'm missing a B here. Here I'm missing two things. I'm missing an A out and a B in. Okay, so I can already pair off these two B's. Where can A go? Well, it can go in here, right? Maybe I should just draw it over here. Right? And then over here I'm missing an incoming B, and it can come from here. So there are many choices, right? So this H prime, there are many choices for H prime. What else? There is an incoming B. Yeah, and there is a B like this. Are we done? I think so. And that's now a covering map. The only non-trivial thing to see is that, in fact, things match up, right? How do I know that I can, if I have a B missing, that there's, that there's the opposite B, the B with the opposite sign missing somewhere else? Well, you can just count. I mean, you have to have the same number. I mean, the original picture has the same number of incoming and outgoing B's. So there has to be, if there is a missing incoming B, there has to be somewhere else missing outgoing B. And that's it, right? So that's the picture of H prime now. H prime will have finite index because it's a finite sheeted covering map to the rows. And the original thing is a subgraph. When you take a subgraph of a graph, then its fundamental group is a free factor of the fundamental group of the big graph, right? You can see that, for example, also by thinking about maximal trees. Take a maximal tree in the subgraph and then complete it to a maximal tree in the big graph. And that'll give you a basis for the fundamental group of the big graph, so that some subset of the basis corresponds to the fundamental group of the subgraph. Okay, so maybe this is a good time for a break, and then we'll have some more applications after the break. Okay.